A few years ago when I started the farm, people will always ask me why did I have a focus on working with young black males. So just a little bit about that reasoning was simply because I saw, as I was a teacher, I was teaching at a very rough school in Durham. I saw that demographic didn't have the commitment or the resources needed to help them. That's why I started an academy for that specific demographic. But what I started to see, like now that we've worked with youth over the last 8 years, there's something specifically happening with this demographic, which is very concerning to me. The farm was a place and is a place where it served as a therapy for these young men. So not only would I see them change their perspective on life when they were here, it would also carry over to them being outside of the farm. That's why I'm always advocating for farming, because I've seen it firsthand what it can do hands-on for these youth. And what I'm also saying, I think it does it for people in general. I think we all have the right to be connected to the land, and in a positive way. And what I saw after they left the farm, especially with two of the young men, they reverted back to what I felt like I was keeping them from. So they basically got into the streets. And when I think about it now and I reflect on it, because I've had to talk to attorneys on 2 separate occasions, I've thought about these kids being born into this environment. And we all can be accountable, or we all have to share accountability in our lives. So I'm not saying that they are absolved of the decisions they've made, but I think it's very hard when you have an influence, you have community that supports you doing the wrong thing. So an instance would be somebody who gets out of a jail or a prison, and then where do they go? If they go back to the environment they came from, what do you think the outcome is going to be? But what I start to see with the kids now is that even when they were granted opportunities, they still needed to be connected to the structure of the farm. And I don't think it's me necessarily. I think if I could go back, what I would do, I would try to connect them to resources that allowed them to have some type of relationship to a farm wherever they went. And one student got off track in his teens, another one in his 20s. And when I start like to reflect on it, I think about solutions. I think about how essentially, like, we did get support from organizations for our programming, but out of that programming, infrastructure wasn't built, because that takes a lot more. One person can't do. If I really went into detail, like how much time I spent with these young men, you probably, if you want to get an idea of time, my wife, she could tell you. I think about infrastructure and more people being involved, because what's happening now in society, what I'm seeing, and I don't know if this is a good metric, but I think social media does reflect consciousness of people. People are essentially calling for the removal of a specific demographic in our community, in the black community. And I'm just like, how can we come to this conclusion when we haven't put infrastructure in place to aid these young men? So I started thinking, I think, and an idea came upon me today, I think that the military will be a good route. More junior ROTC programs in these schools will be a great resource for these young men, because if we look at the behavior, it all is connected to, I would say, economics, which I think the Army has the infrastructure to help with, and also essentially warfare. And so we're talking about people who are participating in this. I do not think that it is odd for young men to want to fight. And it's a cultural piece that I think is ingrained in the fabric of our country. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad urge. It's just how it's facilitated. So now you have young men who are coming into, and they come out of adolescence. And I don't want to say manhood because we haven't necessarily defined manhood in our community, but they're getting older. And the reason I say that, I think there's a huge difference from being a male and going into manhood. Just because you're a male and you're older does not necessarily mean that we can call you a man, or that you've entered manhood. I think that's a conversation for later. We can get into that later. But all of these urges or desires these young men have, they're being facilitated in a way where it's not productive behavior. And then we turn around and we look at the child and we say, you should have been better. Then my question is, with what resources? And now I know that we're talking about young adolescents whose brains are still developing, who are making bad decisions. So I do think a lot of now I'm not saying everybody, but I do think a lot of these young men, they're redeemable. But I think that we have to facilitate and connect them to more opportunities. I think the military, all the money that goes into the military budget every year, why don't we push within our community for this to be something, these junior ROTC programs to be developed? We hold the families accountable. There's a commitment up front so these young men can go do something productive. More productive than staying in the environment. We can identify the kids in middle school. It's easy. And it's very easy to do. And I will argue that the majority of youth just in general need a discipline and a structure to be a part of, because I'm just not seeing it in our community. Mind you, I was a former teacher. I'm seeing it in all of them. So it's just I can speak on it from our community because that's who I'm interacting with the most and that's who I'm the closest to. So I think that this may be a potential option for young men. And I know somebody's going to hear, like, what about the young women? I personally, and I've always said this on interview stages, I have a honeybee. It just flew up to me. But I'm not as familiar with that community. So I don't want to speak and say, this is what women need, or this is what young black women need. I think that'd be very naive of me. That's why if you listen to my interviews, you never hear me offer a critique there. I will critique like information, but not the population, if that makes sense. But I think that we need to be more persistent and committed to coming up with solutions, because it's a part of our population that we're not engaging with because we're either scared or we feel like it's too difficult. Would you have to acknowledge that we don't have a concept of productive manhood in our communities? So then what processes do our youth go through to become men? And what we're now seeing is that not only are young black males from the inner city and I don't want to say, no, let me scratch that. I'm not going to say inner city. I'm going to say young black males from a specific socioeconomic demographic. Not only are they influenced heavily by a specific culture that isn't productive, middle class ones are too. So now that we see more middle class adolescents engaging in that behavior and choosing to, what are we waiting on? Like, if we waited too long for one demographic within our community to do it, and then we're going to let the other group do it too, and then we're just going to sit around and then blame them for it. And then we have on the other side of young black males who go to college. Like, I had experience early in the year where I made a remark about young black males and their behavior. And then the young black males in college, you all, started talking to me as if they were in a game. And I'm sitting here and I'm just like, when I was that age, I could disagree with the older male, and I would not be, because out of respect for my own father and how I was raised, I'm not arguing and disrespecting, and I'm not saying I never disrespected an older male. Like when I was younger, I had instances where I did, but as I matured, it's not something I would do, and I haven't done it ever, I don't think. And I'm not saying because I could end up where it's just, you see a video of me arguing with somebody, like, so that line can be just like I don't feel like I was yelling at Akeem, but people feel like, so it can become ambiguous. But what I'm trying to get at is there's a type of culture that we want to align ourselves with as black males that is not productive to the fabric of our community or our society at large. So what I want to just put out into the universe, or put out, is that we need more planning, and we need to be more intentional with this population and come up with a solution, because the voices that we have in the media aren't doing that and aren't going to do that and never will do that. They've been propped up to be in a space to only confuse and mislead our people whenever there's a productive conversation around this topic. And I think I'm tired of it. I'm personally tired of it. So I've been sitting back thinking at the farm, like just different ways and how we can relaunch our youth program so it is more sustainable and it is more influential, and it not only targets the student but also the families. So I think one thing is we have funding for homes out here, like tiny homes, where when people get out of a scenario, I'm not even going to say always prison, it's a non-productive scenario, where they can then come and stay here, work at the farm, and have housing, food, shelter, clothing, have the basic necessities around them, be disconnected from the community to help produce these results in order for them to change their mindset. But we're only one space that can do that. This would need to happen in across the board in a lot of other spaces. But the other thing I was thinking was the military. We identify these young men at a young age. We say, hey, at 15, you have a 10-year commitment, or 13, you have a 10-year commitment to entering the military. This is what you're going to be exposed to. And then when they get of age, or they get to a certain point, we send them out of the environment. Because one thing we do know, the longer we stay in this environment, the more dysfunctional outcomes we garner. And we have to address this. So let me know you all's thoughts. Like, comment, and subscribe. And let's see if we can get some momentum behind this conversation.